Imagine being buried alive with your lover, not metaphorically, literally. Stone tomb, shared grave. Your body's arranged so your noses touch for eternity. That's not poetry. That's Khnum-Hetep and Nyankhnum, royal manicurists, servants in Pharaoh's palace. 2400 BCE, dead and frozen in an embrace that screams louder than any words ever could. The tomb was discovered in 1964, in the necropolis at Saqqara, and the archaeologists, they didn't know what to do with it. Two men, cheek to cheek, nose to nose, the most intimate pose in Egyptian funerary art, reserved for married couples, for husbands and wives. And here were two men, their wives buried in separate chambers, secondary, afterthoughts. These men chose each other, for eternity. But here's what the textbooks never printed. This wasn't hidden, wasn't shameful, wasn't some dirty secret scratched into a tomb wall and forgotten when the sand swallowed it whole. It was honored, celebrated, carved into limestone by people who saw two men in love and thought, these men deserve to face eternity together, their names linked, their titles identical, overseers of the royal manicurists. In life they served the king. In death they served no one but each other. Now ask yourself why you weren't taught this. I'm going to tell you stories today that will make your skin crawl with recognition. Not because they're graphic, although some of them are. Some of them will make you look away from the screen. Some of them will make you feel things you can't name. But because they prove that everything you were told about sexuality in history is a lie. Not a gentle lie, not an innocent omission. A deliberate, violent, centuries-long campaign to burn the truth and salt the earth where it stood. And the people who did it knew exactly what they were doing. They had names, they had policies, they had theology, and they won, for a while. They won. You feel that tightness in your chest right now? That's cognitive dissonance. Let it sit there. Let it ache. Don't push it away. Because cognitive dissonance is the feeling of your worldview cracking open to make room for truth that was always there. Waiting, buried. Literally buried. We're going to ancient Greece first. And no, not the sanitized version your high school textbook fed you between math class and lunch period. Not the Greece of white marble statues with their genitals chiseled off by Victorian curators who couldn't handle the truth. The real Greece. The Greece that smelled of olive oil and sweat and semen and blood. The Greece where men fought beside their lovers, because dying in front of the person who'd seen you naked and trembling and gasping was worse than dying in front of an enemy's spear. The sacred band of Thebes, 300 men, 150 couples, elite soldiers, the most feared fighting force in the Greek world for a generation. Their logic was simple and brutal and psychologically devastating. You fight harder when your lover is watching, not your friend, not your brother, your lover, the person whose body you know, whose breath you've tasted. Shame becomes a weapon, love becomes armor. Every man fights like a god because the alternative, being seen as a coward by the person who loves you, is a fate worse than having your guts opened on the battlefield. And for decades, they were invincible. Decades. They shattered Spartan dominance at the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BCE. Sparta, the warrior society, the people who threw weak babies off cliffs, destroyed by an army of lovers. Let that sink in. The Spartans, who also institutionalized male-male relationships in their military training, by the way, who expected every warrior to take a younger male lover, who believed that erotic bonds between soldiers created unbreakable fighting units. The Spartans were crushed by men who had turned love into a weapon more effective than anything Sparta had. Then came Chaeronea, 338 BCE, Philip II of Macedon, Alexander the Great's father, a military genius who'd spent years studying Greek warfare. He faced the sacred band across a plain in Boeotia, and he destroyed them, every single one, 300 men, killed to the last soldier. When they were dead, Philip walked the battlefield. He found their bodies stacked together, paired, lovers who died beside each other, refusing to retreat, refusing to break formation, refusing to abandon the person they loved. And Philip, the conqueror, the hard man, the father of the man who would conquer the known world, Philip wept, stood over their corpses and wept like a child. Perish any man who suspects these men of suffering or doing anything shameful. That's what Philip said. A conqueror undone by love he couldn't comprehend. He built a monument, the Lion of Chaeronea, that still stands today. You can visit it, touch the stone, Feel the weight of what happened there. 300 men who loved each other, buried together, honored by the man who killed them. But let me make you more uncomfortable. Because Greek love wasn't pretty, it wasn't romantic, it was transactional, hierarchical. Older men, Erastes, the lovers, took younger men, Eromenos, the beloved, as students, protégés, sexual partners. The younger partner was expected to be pursued, to resist, to eventually yield. And the relationship was supposed to end when the younger man grew body hair. When he became a man, then he was expected to marry a woman and become an Erastes himself. The cycle continued. Whispered, this wasn't liberation, this was a system. Cold, structured, brutal in its clarity. The Greeks didn't have words for gay or straight, they had words for who penetrates and who receives. Power lived in the penetrating. Shame lived in being penetrated. A free adult male citizen who was known to enjoy being penetrated. Social death. Political ruin. The comedies of Aristophanes are full of jokes about men who liked it too much. The insults were specific, vicious. Designed to destroy Socrates, the father of Western philosophy, the man who died for truth, argued that love between men was actually more noble than love between men and women. Because male-male love, he said, was driven by the soul's desire for wisdom and virtue. Heterosexual love was just about making babies, physical, animal, inferior. Not all Greeks agreed, but the fact that the argument existed, that philosophers debated the relative nobility of same-sex versus different-sex love. That tells you something about what was normal in ancient Athens. And the women? Sappho, from the island of Lesbos, which is where we get the word lesbian. You knew that, but you probably don't know what her poetry actually says, because most of it was destroyed, deliberately, by Christians, by the church, by people who read her verses about female desire and felt something they couldn't control, and decided the only solution was annihilation. She wrote, "That man seems to me equal to the gods, the man who sits opposite you and listens to your sweet speaking and lovely laughing. This sets my heart trembling in my breast, for when I look at you, even for a moment, no speaking is left in me. My tongue breaks. A thin flame runs under my skin, seeing nothing, my ears hum, sweat pours down me, trembling seizes me all over. I am paler than grass." That's not translation, that's testimony. That's a woman in 600 BCE describing the physical sensation of desire with a precision that still burns. The sweating, the trembling, the flame under the skin. She ran a school for young women on Lesbos, a community of girls and women who learned poetry and music and dance. And they loved each other. They fell in love with each other. Sappho wrote wedding songs for them, poems of longing when they left, verses so explicit in their desire that later centuries couldn't handle them. MC3 the church burned her work. Pope Gregory VII ordered her poems destroyed in 1073. Systematic, deliberate, 9 volumes, 9 books of poetry, reduced to fragments, scraps, lines quoted by later authors who didn't know they were preserving the last evidence of the greatest female poet of antiquity. We have maybe 650 lines in total, out of what was probably 10,000. The rest? Ash. Gone. Erased. They burned what they couldn't control. Think about the poems you'll never read. Think about what that loss feels like. A woman's voice, describing desire for another woman, silenced for 1,000 years. And we're supposed to believe this was about morality. Rome next. And Rome didn't give a fuck. Not in the way you think. The Roman Empire was the most sexually chaotic civilization in the ancient world. And the rules weren't about gender. They were about power. Always power. The rule was this: a Roman man could fuck anyone below his status. Women, slaves, male prostitutes, boys, foreigners, anyone. What he couldn't do, what would destroy him socially, politically, legally, was receive penetration, because receiving meant you were passive, feminine, inferior. A man who enjoyed being penetrated was no longer a man. He was something else, something lesser, something that could be used. Emperor Nero learned this the hard way, and this story is so wild it sounds made up. But it's documented, multiple sources. Nero fell in love with a male slave named Sporus. He had Sporus castrated, then he married him, in a public ceremony, with a dowry, with a wedding veil. Nero was the bride, the penetrated, the passive partner. Rome lost its collective mind. Not because Nero was with a man, because he was being fucked like a woman, the emperor, the most powerful man in the world. Playing wife Suetonius describes it with barely contained disgust. And the disgust isn't about homosexuality. It's about status violation, about a man who should have been the ultimate penetrator choosing to be penetrated. That was the sin, the degradation, the unforgivable crime against Roman masculinity. Hadrian, emperor from 117 to 138 CE, one of the 5 good emperors, builder of Hadrian's Wall in Britain, and utterly, catastrophically in love with a teenage Greek boy named Antinous. We don't know exactly how they met, but Antinous became Hadrian's constant companion, travelled with him, hunted with him, shared his bed, and then in 130 CE Antinous drowned in the Nile. The circumstances are murky. Accident, sacrifice, murder, we don't know. But Hadrian's response was unprecedented. He deified Antinous, made him a god, built a city in Egypt, Antinopolis, in his honour, minted coins with Antinous' face across the entire empire, erected temples, commissioned statues. More statues of Antinous survive from antiquity than any other figure except Augustus and Hadrian himself. A teenage boy, a lover, immortalized in marble and bronze across 3 continents. This wasn't private grief. This was state-sponsored worship. The most powerful man in the world making his dead boyfriend a god. And the empire accepted it, because Hadrian was the penetrator, the active partner, status preserved, hierarchy intact, love acceptable only within the cage of power. But here's where the rot creeps in. Every civilization I've mentioned so far, Greece, Rome, they accepted same-sex desire only when it reinforced power structures, when it upheld the dominance of free men over everyone else. Slaves had no choice in who used their bodies. Boys had no voice in who took their youth. Women, barely documented, always controlled. Their desires were suppressed or ignored. This wasn't liberation. This was regulated predation, wrapped in poetry and philosophy and marble statues. Egypt was different. Mesopotamia was different. The Americas were different. And that's where this story gets dangerous. Mesopotamia, stop everything. Because this is where the story cracks open. This is where history proves that gender diversity isn't modern, isn't Western, isn't a trend, isn't a mental illness, isn't a sin. It's older than your God, older than the Bible, older than the concept of sin itself. The Sumerians had a word, urs. It meant something like third gender, not a perversion, not a deviation, a recognized social category. These individuals, assigned male at birth but living as something else entirely, held sacred roles in temples. They served the goddess Inanna, Ishtar in Akkadian, the goddess of love and war, the goddess of paradox, and her priests became paradox made flesh. By the Akkadian period, the term Asinu referred to individuals who were neither male nor female in the conventional sense. They wore women's clothing, spoke in feminine voices, performed rituals that required existing outside the binary. Their sacred songs, the balag, were essential to temple worship. And here's the part that should make your blood run hot. They weren't tolerated. They were holy, holy. The word should burn in your mouth. The Gala priests of Inanna. These were men who became something else. Something sacred, precisely because they transcended the categories their society imposed on everyone else. They had spiritual powers the binary priests didn't. They could mediate between male and female, between human and divine, between worlds. Holiness lives outside binary. That's not poetic. That's archaeological fact. Cuneiform tablets prove it. Temple records prove it. The evidence is sitting in museums right now while people debate whether non-binary identity is real. One Gala priest, Ur-Nammu, became king of Ur, the founder of the 3rd dynasty of Ur, one of the most powerful rulers in Mesopotamian history. His law code, the Code of Ur-Nammu, older than Hammurabi's, is the oldest surviving legal text in the world, and the man who wrote it, a gender non-conforming priest, ruling the most powerful city-state in the region. This isn't speculation, this is documented. Multiple sources, multiple references, and no ancient author thought it was strange. Assyrian law records mention sabum, people who dressed and lived as the opposite gender. The Middle Assyrian laws sometimes prescribe punishment for this. Sometimes they don't. The evidence is contradictory, but the existence of the category, the fact that laws had to be written about it, that proves it was common enough to require legislation. The goddess Inanna herself was gender fluid. In the myths, she could change gender. Her priests reflected their goddess. And the relationship between deity and worshipper was one of transformation. The Gala priests became what they worshipped, and in becoming, they found power. Feel that for a moment. a civilization that saw gender diversity as proximity to the divine, not distance from it. Pre-colonial Americas. The two-spirit, but two-spirit is a modern term. A pan-indigenous word created in 1990 at a gathering in Winnipeg. It's not traditional. It's a term of solidarity and resistance. Because before Columbus, before smallpox, before the boarding schools, before everything, hundreds of indigenous nations across North America had their own words, their own categories, their own sacred roles for people who carried both masculine and feminine spirits. They weren't broken. They were blessed. The Navajo had Nadli, one who changes, or one who is transformed. Nadli individuals were recognized as a separate gender. They held important ceremonial roles. They mediated between men and women. They were considered essential to the cosmic balance. Not a mistake, not a sin, a gift. The Lakota had Winkte. The word has been mistranslated. It doesn't mean hermaphrodite. It means wants to be like a woman. Winkte were men who adopted women's roles, dress, work, sometimes sexual partners. They were often healers, visionaries, name givers. They named children because they were believed to have special spiritual insight. They were not mocked. They were consulted. The Mojave had Aliha and Huame. Aliha were assigned male at birth but lived as women. Huame were assigned female at birth but lived as men. The Mojave recognized 4 genders. 4, and all of them were valid. All of them had roles. All of them could marry. The Aliha and Huame underwent initiation ceremonies, public recognition, community validation. This wasn't private identity. This was social integration. The Zuni had the Lamana, and here's where the story becomes a person, not an abstraction. A person Wewa, born around 1849, assigned male, lived as Lamana, a master weaver, a potter, a spiritual leader. In 1886, Wewa traveled to Washington, D.C. as a representative of the Zuni people, met President Grover Cleveland, shook his hand, demonstrated crafts at the Smithsonian, lived in the Capitol for 6 months. And President Cleveland, the leader of the nation that was actively exterminating indigenous cultures, had no idea that the dignified Zuni ambassador before him embodied a gender his Christian empire was trying to erase from existence. Wewa's photograph exists. You can look at it. A person caught between worlds, dignified, beautiful, sacred, and in the background the machinery of genocide grinding toward their people. Now feel this. Really feel it. The boarding schools. The Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania. Founded 1879, its founder, Richard Henry Pratt, had a philosophy. One sentence that contains an entire Holocaust. Kill the Indian, save the man. They took children from their families. Cut their hair. For many tribes, hair held spiritual power. Cutting it was mutilation. Stripped their clothes. Beat their languages out of their mouths. Forced Christian worship. And two-spirit children. Children who were sacred in their communities, children who were believed to carry special gifts from the spirit world, were targeted, specifically, systematically. Children who expressed gender nonconformity were beaten, humiliated, isolated, broken, some of them died. The bodies are still being found, unmarked graves at residential schools across Canada, mass graves near Carlisle. Children who were taken and never came back. Children who were murdered because they existed in bodies that held multiple truths. The bodies were buried, the traditions were burned, but not completely, never completely. Two-spirit people survived. The traditions survived in fragments, in memory, in ceremony conducted in secret. And today, two-spirit indigenous people are reclaiming their heritage, doing the painful work of reconstructing what colonialism tried to destroy, healing the trauma that their grandparents carried, that their parents inherited, that they still feel in their bones. Mughal India, and this is where your assumptions shatter like glass on marble floors, because the Mughals were Muslim, and the Mughal courts were saturated with same-sex desire, not hidden, not whispered, celebrated in poetry, painted in miniature, documented in imperial autobiographies. Emperor Akbar ruled from 1556 to 1605, the greatest of the Mughals. He was surrounded by beautiful young men. His court poet Faizi wrote verses about the emperor's male lovers. These poems were performed at court, before the throne, before the assembled nobility, and no one called it sin. No one demanded punishment. The poetry wasn't coded, it wasn't metaphorical, it was explicit. Akbar's son Jahangir, even more explicit. He wrote his autobiography, the Jahangirnama, the Book of Jahangir, in his own hand, and in it, he describes his attraction to men. He writes about seeing a beautiful boy named Daria Khan. The prose trembles with desire. He describes the boy's beauty in detail, his eyes, his skin, the way light fell on his face. And then he had the encounter painted, a miniature that still exists, the emperor's desire preserved for all time. Shah Jahan, the man who built the Taj Mahal, the ultimate symbol of heterosexual love, a monument to his dead wife Mumtaz Mahal that took 22 years and 20,000 workers to complete. And Shah Jahan also had male lovers. Court poetry celebrated his love for men as equal to his love for his wife. The Mughal understanding was this: the soul wants beauty. Gender is irrelevant. Love is love. The spirit doesn't distinguish. The Persian and Urdu literary traditions that flourished under the Mughals contain thousands of examples of same-sex love poetry. The ghazal form, the aching, longing poetic structure, was often addressed to a beloved whose gender was deliberately ambiguous. The conventions allowed it. The culture accepted it. And this flourishing continued for generations, whispered the Zanana. The women's quarters, secluded behind screens, hidden from male eyes, and inside those marble rooms, women loved women. We know because poetry survived, because court records mention it obliquely, because the silence around female desire is louder than any documentation. The Zanana provided space, rare, protected space, where women could form bonds that were emotional and physical and romantic. The documentation is thinner than for male relationships. But the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. It's evidence of seclusion so complete that even the records couldn't penetrate it. Ancient Japan, wakashu, young male apprentices, adolescents who occupied a recognized third category, not child, not adult man, but something between. They were the objects of male desire, and this wasn't secret. This was the dominant form of male-male love in Japanese society for centuries. The wakashu had their own aesthetics, their own fashion, their own literature. The Shudo tradition, the way of the young, was considered a path to virtue. Samurai took wakashu as lovers and apprentices. The relationship was supposed to be educational, formative. The older man taught the younger martial skills, ethics, loyalty. And sex was part of that education, onagata. Male actors who performed femininity so perfectly in kabuki theatre that they became objects of desire themselves. They studied women's movements, women's gestures, women's emotional expressions. And they became so convincing that aristocratic men sought them as lovers. Some onagata also had relationships with women. The category was fluid, performance and reality blurred. And this was normal. For centuries, Buddhism in Japan did not condemn same-sex love. Shinto had no concept of sexual sin. The moral framework was different. Relationships between men weren't inherently problematic. The problem was only in excess or neglect of duty. And this persisted until the Meiji Restoration. The Meiji government criminalized male-male sexual acts. Article 266 of the Penal Code. It wasn't because Japanese culture had changed. It was because Japan was being forced to modernize, to adopt Western legal and social frameworks to avoid colonization. They traded their indigenous traditions for a seat at the imperial table, sold their queer citizens for diplomatic legitimacy. The law remained in place for years. Decades, generations of Japanese men grew up thinking their desires were foreign contamination, Western perversion, when in truth, those desires had been accepted in Japan for longer than Christianity had existed. Women too, the Nyonya or Onabagata, women who took on male social roles. They wore men's clothing, carried swords, had female lovers. They appear in Edo period literature. In art prints, they were documented, they were visible, and they were not hidden in shame. Polynesia, the Mahu, Hawaii and Tahiti, third gender individuals. They held important roles in healing, crafts, religious ceremony. Hawaiian society recognized that human beings existed on a spectrum. The Mahu were not seen as deficient. They were seen as having special gifts, the ability to move between male and female worlds, to understand both, to heal both. King Kamehameha III, the king who unified Hawaii, had a Mahu advisor. The role was considered essential to royal governance, to spiritual balance, to the proper functioning of society. Captain James Cook documented the Mahu in Tahiti in the 18th century. Other European explorers made similar observations. They saw the Mahu, described them, often with confusion, sometimes with disgust, but they saw them. And then the missionaries came, the London Missionary Society, the Catholics, the Protestants. They arrived in Polynesia with Bibles and laws and guns, and they targeted the Mahu first, because the Mahu were visible, because the Mahu were sacred, because the Mahu represented everything Christianity couldn't tolerate. The idea that human diversity was holy, the word Mahu became a slur, used by colonized people against their own, to prove they'd been properly Christianized. The traditions were suppressed so completely that in Hawaii, the traditional understanding was largely lost. Contemporary Hawaiian LGBTQ+ activists are reconstructing their connections to these traditions from historical documents, from explorer journals, from fragments, in Samoa the Fa'afafine, in the manner of a woman, assigned male at birth, living as women, integral to Samoan society, not hidden, not shamed. They were simply part of how Samoans understood human diversity. They held roles in women's work, ceremony, family, and they survived the missionaries, barely. The Fa'afafine are still recognized in Samoa today, a living tradition that refused to die. In Tonga, the Whakaleiti, similar roles, similar functions, ceremonial participation, social integration. Here's the pattern. Watch it form. Every civilization, every continent. Thousands of years, Christian missionaries arrive. Indigenous traditions are targeted as sinful. Colonial law codifies the suppression. Barring schools and prisons enforce the new order. Historians erase the evidence. Generations grow up believing the lie. That heterosexuality and binary gender are the natural human default. That everything else is modern deviation. Western corruption, mental illness, and the evidence against this lie? Burned, buried, omitted from textbooks, cut from curricula, censored from museums. You were taught about Socrates, but not the sacred band. You learned about samurai, but not Wakashu. You memorized the Taj Mahal, but not the poetry about Shah Jahan's male lovers. You can name Greek gods, but you can't name a single two-spirit person. This curriculum was not accidental. It was designed by colonial administrators who knew exactly what they were doing. By historians who chose destruction over truth. When the British colonized India, they imposed Section 377 of the Indian Penal Code, carnal intercourse against the order of nature. The law specifically targeted same-sex acts, and it stayed in place until 2018. 2018. People alive today, people watching this video, grew up criminalized by a law their colonizers wrote. When India's Supreme Court finally overturned Section 377, the colonial legacy was 157 years old. MC9 in Africa, same-sex relationships and gender diversity existed before colonization. Documented, ethnographic records, anthropological evidence. Then colonial powers criminalized them, and those laws still enforced today, right now, as you watch this. Uganda's Anti-Homosexuality Act, Nigeria's Same-Sex Marriage Prohibition Act. These are not African traditions. They are British exports, weaponized, adopted, perpetuated by post-colonial governments that learned homophobia from their oppressors and called it cultural values. The blood on these laws runs deep. It's the blood of people killed in witch hunts, driven from their families, imprisoned, executed, and the politicians who enforce these laws cite tradition and religion while enforcing legal frameworks written in London, written in Paris, written in Lisbon, imposed at gunpoint, maintained by lies. I need you to feel this anger, not performative outrage, not social media activism where you retweet something and feel better about yourself. Real anger, the kind that sits in your stomach and doesn't leave. The kind that wakes you up at 3 in the morning. Because what was done, the erasure, the suppression, the rewriting of human history, was not accidental. It was a project, generational, coordinated, funded by empires, backed by theology, enforced by violence. And the architects of that project are dead. But their laws are still killing people, and you were taught the edited version. We all were, every single one of us. The textbook gave you 2 options. Remember, either pretend ancient people were just like us but more repressed, or treat every non-heterosexual relationship as a weird footnote nobody really practiced. Both are lies. Comfortable, manageable, bloodless lies. The truth is that human diversity existed everywhere. On every continent, in every era. Recognized, honored, integrated, and it was deliberately, systematically, violently erased by people who knew they were lying, who knew what they were destroying, who chose to destroy it anyway. Khnumhotep and Niankhkhnum are still in their tombs at Saqqara. Nose to nose. 4,400 years. The stone outlasted the pharaohs, outlasted the Greeks, outlasted the Romans, outlasted the empires that tried to suppress what they represented. The sacred band of Thebes is still remembered. Their monument still stands. Antinous still has statues in museums across the world. Wiwa's photograph still exists, grey and dignified and defiant. Sappho's fragments still burn. The Gala priest's cuneiform tablets are still being translated. The poetry of Mughal India still speaks of male beauty with unashamed longing. The Farfafine are still living their truth in Samoa. The two-spirit people are still reclaiming their sacred traditions. The fire couldn't destroy everything. The laws couldn't erase everything. The schools couldn't break everyone. They tried to burn it all. They failed. The truth survived. And now you know it. If this made you uncomfortable, good. Sit with the discomfort. Let it reshape something inside you. And if you want to help undo centuries of historical erasure, share this story. Talk about Khnumhotep and Niankhkhnum. Talk about Wiwa. Talk about the Gala priests. Refuse to let the silence stand. They've been silent long enough. Scoosbeer. Hit the bell. Leave a comment, even if it's just anger, especially if it's anger. I read them, every single one. And the algorithm rewards engagement, so every comment pushes this history to someone who needs to know it exists. Next week, we go darker, deeper, bloodier. Same time, same channel. The History in Fact.